Good morning. Okay, The Prince Warriors and the Unseen Invasion, Volume 2, Chapter 16. Just Stand. Xavier, Levi, and Brianna stood stock still until the smoke cleared. Xavier checked his face, his body, making sure they were still intact. The Olathron hadn't hit them, but the blinding flash and the awful noise had made him feel certain that it had. "I'm scared," whispered Brianna. Xavier was too, but he didn't want the other two to see that. He looked up to the top of the hill, still smoking from the first Olathron attack. It seemed like a long way, far longer than it had been running down. Climbing that hill would be the hardest thing he ever did. Harder even than walking into a sandstorm or navigating the fortress of chaos. But he knew deep down in the pit of his soul that he had to do it. "You guys don't have to come," Xavier said, turning to Levi and Brianna. "Stay here with Evan and Manuel. It might be safer." "We're coming," Levi said. He sounded braver than he looked. Brianna nodded in agreement, forcing her shoulders back and her chin lifted. Xavier nodded and took a step forward. Immediately, another Olathron crashed down, this one only a few feet away, the blast knocking the warriors sideways. For a long moment, they were blinded by the smoke and falling ash, their hearing deafened by the concussive blast. "Is everyone okay?" Xavier asked as the smoke cleared. "Yeah," Brianna checked to make sure. She still had all of her fingers. "That one was close." Xavier was surprised to find that the three of them were still standing despite the force of the explosion. Something about his boots felt different. He picked up one foot and noticed that steel hobnails had sprouted from the soles. The spikes had dug deeply into the ground, keeping the warriors from falling. "The boots," he said. "Check it out." Levi and Brianna both looked down at their feet, noticing the spikes in their boots for the first time. "Stellar," Brianna exclaimed. "Yeah, cool," said Levi. "They'll help us to get up the hill," said Xavier. With that, he started, and the others followed suit. They'd only taken a few more steps before another glowering Olathron came roaring toward them. "The rock," Xavier said, pointing to a large boulder partway up the slope. They scrambled to get behind it as the Olathron exploded just in front of them, most of the force of the blast absorbed by the rock, which shook and splintered as if it were made of glass. Brianna bent over, covering her head with her arms. "I'm really scared now," she whispered. "That makes two of us," said Levi. "Three of us," said Xavier. "Come on. We need to move. Keep looking up. Don't look at those things." "Remember crossing the Bridge of Tears? Stay focused, okay?" Brianna nodded, wiping the tears and ash from her eyes. Levi impulsively grabbed her hand. "I'm right here, Bean," he said. He smiled at her, and she smiled back. "There's a clump of bushes up ahead," Xavier said. "We're going to run to them and take cover again." "I don't think we'll make it," said Brianna. "We will. Our boots will get us there." The three warriors took off at a dead run for the clump of bushes, their boots giving them a firm footing on the increasingly treacherous terrain. They dove for the bushes just as another Olathron exploded. Although this one was farther away, the brush did not give them protection, but it did give them a hiding place for the moment. "Seems like they shoot when they can see us," said Xavier. "Is there another place farther up to hide?" said Levi. Xavier peeked around the brush to scout out the terrain. "I don't see one. We'll have to go all the way to the top from here." All the way? Xavier nodded. I'll go first. You two stay behind me. Run as fast as you can. Don't stop. What if another Olathron comes? Said Levi. Xavier glanced from one to the other, not knowing quite how to answer. He shrugged and said, Duck. Duck, Levi repeated. That's it, just duck? It's all we got, said Xavier. Another Olathron thundered nearby. Brianna covered her ears, trying not to cry. Xavier looked at her. You okay? She nodded, glancing at Levi. He gave her a reassuring smile. Let's do this, she said. Xavier crouched like a track runner and took a deep breath. On your mark, get set. He heard an imaginary starting pistol in his head and took off for the top of the hill. Just keep moving, he told himself. Don't stop. He felt as though he could see a path laid out for him, perhaps projected by the breastplate. He wasn't really sure. It did not go straight up, but swerved this way and that, making the run take even longer. And yet he felt sure-footed, as if his boots were actually carrying him up the hill. The smoke stung his eyes, and the blast made his ears ring. But he could still run, still breathe. He felt energized, as if each step he took gave him the courage to take another. He glanced back once or twice to make sure Levi and Brianna were following him. He shouted encouragements to them, straining to be heard over the constant roar of Olathron. Almost there, Xavier called out. An Olathron came crashing toward him. He shouted and dove out of the way, landing on his face, feeling rocks and dirt from the blast rain down on him. He raised his head. Only a few more feet to go. He low-crawled the rest of the way, shouting for Levi and Brianna to follow his lead and stay low. He hoped they were near. When finally he got to the top of the hill, he waited for the other two to join him. They crawled up on their bellies, coated in dirt and ash, hardly recognizable. They stayed still a moment, covering their ears in anticipation of another cacophony of noise. It never came. Levi cautiously removed his hands from his ears. He lifted his head and looked around. I think they've stopped shooting, he whispered. Xavier rose to his knees, poised in case the attack should start up again. He got slowly to his feet. Levi joined him. Brianna rose as well, gazing around in shock. There was no beautiful view anymore. The world around them was ringed in smoke, patches of scarred and burning ground showing through here and there. The once grassy hill under their feet had been eviscerated, torn open, nothing but dirt and bare rock. Trees that were once fully in leaf had become crooked, blackened sticks. It looked like a war zone. Nothing moved but smoke and flame as far as he could see. Xavier felt nauseated as he thought of Evan. He wondered if his baby brother was okay. Did we do it? Brianna said. Is it over? I guess so, Xavier said in a soft voice, although he couldn't quite believe it. Guess all we had to do was get to the top of the hill. That really wasn't bad at all, Levi said, a laugh bursting out of him. That was really more of a gasp. Well, it was kind of bad, I guess. But we survived, right? We should tell the other two it's safe to come out now. Brianna turned back toward the grove of trees where Evan and Manuel were hiding. Nothing much was visible through the haze and flames. She hesitated, fearing the worst, and looked to Xavier in hopes that he'd call out to them. But his expression told her that he couldn't. So she stepped forward, cupped her hands to her mouth, and shouted, her voice scratchy from all the smoke. "Hey guys, all clear." She hoped the others couldn't tell how worried she was. For a long, scary moment, she saw nothing move at all. Then Evan and Manuel emerged cautiously from the smoke-rimmed trees and looked up at the three kids at the top of the hill. Brianna screeched with joy. Xavier let out a breath and bent over, closing his eyes in relief. "Come on," shouted Levi. Evan and Manuel scrambled up to the top of the hill, skirting the large smoking craters where the Olathrons had landed. As soon as they arrived, Manuel spotted blackened metal fragments that had been part of the shield that he left on top of the hill. "My shield!" he exclaimed. He bent over to pick up one of the mangled shards, but his sleeve caught on the sharpened edge. As he tugged it away, he felt a stabbing pain. "Ow!" he gasped. He raised up his forearm to reveal a small gash that had already started to bleed. "Oh, be careful," Brianna said. "It's destroyed." Manuel tossed the hunk of metal away and slumped in despair, nursing his wounded arm. "Don't worry, Manuel. You were going to make another one anyway," said Evan, trying to make him feel better. "It will be even better, right?" Manuel nodded mutely. Evan turned to his brother. "No more Oreos." "Olathrons," said Xavier, trying to act as if none of it was any big deal. "Awesome," said Evan. "So all you had to do was walk up to the top of the hill, and the bad guys just went away. Guess we didn't need those seeds after all." "Guess not," said Levi. "So what now?" Brianna asked. "Don't we go back to the cave now? Or to the castle for some ice cream?" said Levi, remembering the last time they'd successfully completed a mission. They were able to celebrate with a huge feast in the castle in the clouds. "How do we get there?" Evan asked. "Usually it just happens," said Brianna, glancing around. "Rue shows up and then everything changes and we're just there." The kids waited a moment longer. "Nothing's happening," said Levi. "Wait," said Xavier, putting up a hand to stop their chatter. "Do you hear that?" From somewhere far away there came a long, low rumble, like thunder gathering in the corner of the world, but it didn't come and go like thunder. It kept on rumbling, growing louder. The smoke that lay over the landscape started to shiver, as if whatever was making the sound was sending shock waves through the air. "Maybe the forgers are coming now," Brianna said. "We should go back down the hill," said Levi nervously. "Rue will probably be coming to get us." "Look," said Xavier. They turned their eyes to the sky as the entire horizon seemed to burst into flame, a brilliant light shooting up from the veil of smoke, turning the red sky above Skatos nearly white. "What is it?" Brianna gasped. "A nuclear bomb?" said Levi. "I think it's the Olathrons," Xavier said softly. "Like a lot of them." The 5 kids inched closer together, frozen in fear, as hundreds of huge flaming arrows, more like rockets, brighter than the sun, burst into the air and began to speed toward them, the ghoulish faces with gaping red mouths laughing at the warriors' terror. "There's too many. There's no escape this time," Levi muttered. The Olathrons filled their whole vision. They cowered low, shielding their eyes from the blinding light. Xavier tried to think. What had Ruach told them? "The seed is your shield." The seed. He'd almost forgotten about it. He opened his fist and looked down at the tiny seed. It glowed brightly, as if it were asking to be put to good use. It seemed to be burning with an energy deep inside itself. Xavier raised his gaze to the awful faces of the Olathrons advancing on them. Their progress seemed to have slowed, as if time itself was dragging its heels, prolonging this terrible moment, giving him time to think. What sort of shield could stop these things? No shield ever made would be able to do that. So how could this little seed? The seed is your shield. If the seed was a shield, maybe he had to use it like one. Xavier's fingers closed around the seed, making a fist. Then he thrust his arm straight in front of him, just like he would with a shield. As soon as he did, a sudden jolt shot down his arm. He thought for a moment that the Olathrons had already hit him, but then he realized something else was happening. Streams of infinitesimal red seeds, like electric sparks, burst out from between his tightly closed fingers, spewing out into the air around him. Xavier gasped, struggling to keep his arm steady as the streams of sparks formed a shell around him. A sparkling dome of tiny red lights that flared brightly against the white light of the approaching fireballs. Something had definitely happened. Xavier knew that for sure. He wasn't imagining it. He was completely covered, enclosed in this ethereal, protective shelter that emanated from the seed in his fist. The air felt quieter suddenly. The roar of the approaching Olathrons muted. Xavier glanced at the others and saw them staring at him open-mouthed. Even he wasn't positive what had transpired, but he knew that it was something amazing. "What is that?" Brianna cried. Xavier could hear her, although her voice was muffled by the dome of seed lights around him. "Your seeds," Xavier shouted. His voice sounded weird to him, like he was inside a tin can. He hoped they could hear him. He yelled even louder, "Raise up your seeds like this." Levi and Brianna immediately took out their seeds and followed his lead, raising their seeds in their fist. They too felt the jolt in their arms and saw their seeds open, shooting out fountains of tiny red seed lights that covered them in a protective shell. They could still see the fireballs and hear the approaching whine of the Olathrons, but the sound seemed duller, less terrifying than it had a moment before. "It must be the shield Rue was talking about," Levi cried, although it didn't look anything like a shield, nor did it look solid enough to stop the momentum of the Olathrons. "I don't have one," said Evan in a shaking voice. "Me neither," Manuel said. "Just stay close to us," said Xavier, pulling Evan to his side so that the two of them were covered by his dome. Levi did the same thing with Manuel. "Don't move, just stand." The kids stood frozen, watching the flaming rockets with the horrible faces plummet toward them. But as they watched, the faces of the Olathrons changed. They were no longer laughing. Instead, the empty eyes widened, and the mouths yawned open in what looked like fear, horror. The warriors braced themselves for the impact. And in the next moment, the Olathrons crashed into them.